Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 32. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander. After a tough loss on Thursday night, as the Chargers had every single opportunity to not only cover the 3 points, maybe 3.5, but they also had a chance to win, they lose in OT 34-28. Yes, not even covering the 3.5. More on that in a sec, because as you can tell, that one hurt my feelings last night. We'll get there, I promise. But first, as always, I want to make sure that you guys check out Cash Grab. Now, you might be asking, wait, what is Cash Grab? Cash Grab is the DRF Sports all-new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and the Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting. Who will win the first quarter? How many touchdowns will George Kittle score? Answering questions like these can end in you winning real money. So download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. And hopefully, we can help you win some cash here as well, as we do this podcast twice a week. On Tuesdays, we recap the week that was, and on Fridays, it's the Picks Pod. And today, it's Friday, which means we'll give you all of our best bets for the NFL in Week 15. Plus, we'll also hit you up with some bowl season picks to start things off as well. Hopefully, you're also getting your betting information from us here on the pod, as well as the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. Again, drf.com/sports for all of the insight and analysis you need each and every day. Plus, of course, we go in depth on this podcast. On today's ep, bowl season is here, so we'll hit you up with our Saturday bowl picks, as well as Week 15 best bets in the NFL, breaking down all of these massive spreads, because there's a lot of big boy spreads this weekend, and, trying to decide which way to go on each. You got to tune in to find out. But also, let's be honest, I need a full breakdown of the Chargers blowing it to KC last night, and luckily for me, Matt Russell is back again to help me out with that, and luckily for you, he joins us right about now. Well. I've had some tough losses this season, but last night, just wow. The Chiefs win in overtime, 34-28 over the Chargers, who were 3 to 3.5 point underdogs, depending on when you bet it. And the Chargers were also in control for the majority of that game. I doubled down hard in the middle of the game on Chargers money line. Why? Why not? And yet here we are. Mr. Matt Russell, this is definitely going to be one of those pods where I think I need the therapy session. But how are you doing on the morning after, this Friday morning?
It's ridiculous, man. Like, you know what? Honestly, I'm a lot of different things here. So, if you're listening to this right now, which if you're literally listening to this, you are listening to this, have a look down at the amount of time that this podcast, what the length of this podcast is. And if it's like under 4 hours, I mean, kudos to us, right? Because this could easily be 4 hours. This game alone could be an hour-long breakdown based on what happened last night. And so for me, listen, I'm going to say all the things that we said basically after last week. You talked about like, we've had some bad beats this year or this little while. I mean, a lot of them just come in the last like week or two, right? Like I'm looking over my spreadsheet and it's like, okay, like I had the Patriots +4 in overtime against Dallas from earlier on in the season. But other than that, there's some unfortunate situations we talked about with regards to the closing line value things with backup quarterbacks and stuff like that, where like, oh yeah, made a good bet at the right time. It just didn't pan out because, whether it was the Minnesota Vikings against Cooper Rush or whether the San Francisco 49ers against Colt McCoy, it didn't necessarily go all that well. But as far as like handicapping a game and like getting the game right and then the game just kind of backfiring on you at the end here, I'm looking at 5 over the last essentially 2 weeks plus last night. And that's just run bad, as we say in the game, right? Like that's just run bad. And so we talk about the idea that like sands of the hourglass, right? Every bet is just a sand in the hourglass, and we, get to the end of the hourglass and we flip it over, and right, that's the season, and you can start the season fresh with the hourglass, and it just pours and pours and pours. And each individual
shouts to Stefano, by the way.
I think I know what you're talking about. Is there a Days of Our Lives reference in there? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. Never one for that, but I do I sadly know what you're talking about vaguely there. We're off to a bang up start here. So again, sands in the hourglass, et cetera, like, all these bets, they're just pouring in, and whatever. And as long as you're making good quality bets, like the one that we made last night, and even as you were watching the game, I tweeted out plus 11.5, plus 10.5 once Kansas City got up early. Obviously Chargers plus 11.5. Again, fundamental stuff, right? Like the Chargers able to move the ball. Kansas City, obviously pretty lucky on that turnover, pretty lucky where Andre Roberts tripped and fell, pretty lucky, again, we'll get into this a little bit more here. I think, imagine when we talk about the high leverage situations from last night, but pretty lucky that Donald Parham dropped that pass at the start of the game as well. And so, it's kind of auto play there where you go like, this game is going to be close. It's certainly not going to be a blowout just because of the way this game started. So there was a bunch of different really good bets on the Chargers, whether it was pre-game or after the fact. And so as long as we keep making those bets, like we're going to be fine over the long term. And there's no, you hope maybe it's just a week or just 2 weeks where just the end game stuff, the Baltimore Clevelands of the world, the Matt Nagy not going for it on 4th down of the world. And who knows what would have happened if he had gone for it then. They still might have not covered. But all of these things, right? Like they didn't need to kind of pile up here on our shoulders over the course of the last 2 weeks. They just happened to do so. And that is the case of running bad. So here's the problem for me here. And I'm going to kind of circle around here. And we're going to get to the point eventually, I promise here, right? But you come to this podcast because you're looking in this space right now for credibility, right? You're looking for people who know what they're talking about. And so the space right now is filled with just a lot of nonsense, to be completely honest with you, right? And you know this, you probably won't even admit it, but it's true. And so the space right now is full of really attractive women making picks. And some of them know what they're talking about, I suppose, and a lot of them don't, right? But that's the marketing element in all of this. And the space is filled with a lot of kids out there, right? Like just fresh out of college, university, right? Not getting paid a ton of money, maybe not getting really paid at all to make a bunch of picks, right? And I feel a little bit bad for them because I don't think they really know what they're doing as far as getting into this industry, et cetera, et cetera. The reason you come to the DRF Sports Podcast is because I'm in the Las Vegas contest. I'm not going to reference the casino because they're not paying me, but I'm in the big Las Vegas context, and I have been for a decade now. And I have a couple of cashes in there and a bunch of other contentions. And so I don't know if you've probably, of course, everybody's seen the movie Rounders. If you've been listening to this podcast, you're a betting person. You probably love the movie Rounders, right? And there's a scene there where Matt Damon's character talks about poker and the idea that once it's not a coincidence, right? It's not an accident that the same guys are in the mix at the World Series of Poker every year. Now, he was talking about that in the context of 2001, where there were less poker players around. Obviously, the Rounders was part of the poker boom, and all of that sort of blew up. And now it's really a lot more difficult for the, Daniel Negreanu's of the world and the Phil Hellmuths of the world to be in the final table at the World Series of Poker, because even though poker is a skilled game, it comes down to luck a lot of the time, right? But the point is that Matt Damon said that statement because it's true. The same people are atop of these leaderboards in a poker tournament or in a handicapping tournament because it isn't just luck. Now, where you fall and where you finish with regards to all of that does unfortunately have a lot to do with luck. So whether it's the Patriots game, whether it's Patriots game against the Cowboys, the Bills against the Bucks, or this game last night, where in these three instances, for the first time, I believe I saw stats at 19 years, three teams who were 3.5 point underdogs failed to cover in overtime, i.e. the favorite got a touchdown in overtime. Yeah. First time in 19 years that three of them in one season. And we just happened to land on each and every one of those games. And so the point is that if you're taking these 3.5 point underdogs or 4 point underdogs, whatever, and you get to overtime, you're probably doing it correctly, right? You're probably making the correct bet. And at that point, it's just up to a coin flip, because you knew once Kansas City won that coin flip last night, right? They were going to go down and score the touchdown. Or maybe it's a broken coverage or this, that, or whatever, right? Each one of these touchdowns that has been scored to kill those bets were like 30, 40, 50 plus yarders, right? Like these weren't situations where teams were just barreling in a touchdown from the 1 yard line, right? Maybe they would have had to settle for a field goal in different circumstances, but they didn't. That's the element of luck. So with 4,000 people in this contest, right? Like I know personally that at least 3,000 of those entries are absolute dead money, right? It's the same thing as the poker player who shows up to the tournament, looks around and is like, that guy's a fish, that guy's a fish, that guy's a fish, that guy's a whale, right? It's the same sort of situation. So as we sit around in the top 100 and we just kind of hope for a good finish to the season, like you need luck to be able to get to the top, right? And I've had years where I've gotten darn near the top, just about right at the top and finish that way. And then I've had years where the last 20 games don't necessarily go my way. Now, again, this is just one game out of 20. And by the way, I should mention, I used the Chargers +3 in the contest last night. All right. It came down to a situation where I was looking at the games and all of the uncertainty, and there's some other strategy stuff that we can talk about when we get into these individual games, because I think it's relatively interesting to people. Maybe it isn't, but who knows? Whatever. It's our podcast. So I decided, listen, I love the Chargers tonight. Like they should be favored in this game, or at the very least, it should be pick'em. And fundamentally what it came down to since last we spoke on Tuesday was the injuries to the Kansas City Chiefs defense. And when they lose three guys, including Chris Jones, and no one seems to be bothered by that in a week, and maybe it's because of all the COVID news and this team getting ravaged and these point spreads swinging crazily, Philly's up to 9.5, and Cleveland's now a 3.5 point underdog. And meanwhile, this game on Thursday night just sits there with Chris Jones, a guy that we've talked about on a regular basis this year as being a key element for the Chiefs, right? Like there's a reason their defense got better at the time that it did. It is not a coincidence, right? And so while the guys like, Gay and Snead, like maybe those guys don't translate as much, but Chris Jones certainly does, right? He is a guy who needs to be double teamed in the interior, which would be then problematic for the rest of the Chargers offensive line that was wounded as well without Rashawn Slater. And so as the week sort of progresses and you find out that Chris Jones isn't going to be in there, you go, okay, so we're going to get the Chiefs defense from when we used to make fun of the Chiefs defense. Like it wasn't that long ago that this team was the laughing stock of all defenses, right? Like this, historically bad. Like that's what they were. So it's an incredibly lazy bet to take the other side, to just take the Chiefs because they've been playing better lately, or the defense has turned it around, because that wasn't the version of that defense last night. And so when you handicap that game by saying the Chiefs aren't going to play defense the way they have been over the last month or so, and then you watch it play out where the Chargers don't punt until the unfortunate end game situation where they're not able to get another 10 to 15 yards to even try a field goal for the game winner at the end. That's the first time they punt all game long. They are going up and down the field on the Chiefs. Now, again, high leverage situations don't go their way, and that's why the points didn't rack up for the Chargers. But from a yardage standpoint, they were beating up the Chiefs to an historically, bad level for the Chiefs defense, right? A lot like it looked like in the first month or two of the season. So the handicap is correct from that standpoint. On the flip side, right, the Chiefs offense, if you're going to tell me that you're going to back the Chiefs -3 on the road against a good team like the Chargers when your defense is compromised, and you think it's because the Chiefs offense is just all of a sudden back because they did well against the Raiders and that clueless game plan that the Raiders put together in both games that they played. Because the other games that the Chiefs have played recently are Green Bay with Jordan Love, Dallas, and Denver. All of those games were at home, and every one of those games was not an impressive offensive performance. Now, again, you see for the first 3 quarters that the Chiefs are struggling on offense to be able to get, I mean, they're making some plays. Listen, the Chargers defense isn't very good. I certainly understand that. So there's going to be some scoring and some yardage put up. But it's not a coincidence that when Derwin James goes out, all of a sudden Travis Kelce blows up in that game, right? All of a sudden he's getting loose, et cetera, which was not the case in the first half of that game. So like, when you talk about luck, it's a matter of, okay, Derwin James only lasts a certain point into this game before he and his hamstring have to be removed from this game, right? The Donald Parham play, all of these sorts of situations before we even get into like the math element of the 4th downs, which was just absolutely burning Twitter to the ground yesterday, which was incredibly ironic because you and I talked on Tuesday about how last week was the week of like moronic NFL analysts and just people not understanding like really the basic stuff in modern day football. And it was like that we had to unfortunately take 2 steps back into the Stone Age yesterday with the results of that game, which we can talk about a little bit more specifically here.
Do you know what my thing is with the going for it on 4th downs that I don't understand? Like, I won't even call myself, and we've been doing this for a couple of years now, so me, right? Like, it's not like I'm some hardcore analytics guy or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
But the part that I don't get from like the real old school or just very generic people talking football is, how do you think that the game plays out in the exact same way if you kick the field goal? Do you know what I mean? Like, we keep treating it as if like, oh, well, if they kicked all these field goals, that's 9 extra points. And like the game and the Chiefs would have just been like, you know what? I think we lose this game. It's over. Yeah. Let's just go home. Right. Like everything changes after that. Like, you don't know if like they start handing the ball off more and then the Chargers fumble. Like, there's so many things that could happen that it's not as simplistic as, well, they left all these points on the board by going for it on 4th down and none of them converted. It's like, okay, but what about the one that did convert late when they took the lead? Like, were you still mad at them going for it on 4th down then? Because it's basically this, like, essentially the same high leverage play that they've been trying to make of course multiple times before, and it just didn't work. So are you mad at it all of the time when clearly, as you stated, because we talked about this game earlier and we've talked about the Chargers and betting on the Chargers and in terms of making good bets, right? I felt all right betting on the Chargers because at least confidently what game they're in. Yeah. Right. Like, they're not going to get blown out. They're going to keep trying to score. They're going to keep trying to put points on the board. They're not settling for field goals. They're trying to get touchdowns. And hey, it didn't work in this instance, but I'd still ride with that over and over again. So I do understand a lot of where you're coming from here in terms of, just talking about the people, like, why would you bet on the Chiefs, right? Like, you're blindly just betting on the Chiefs because it's Chiefs and it's name brand and cool. You win this round, right? More power to you. The money cashes, more power to you. I get it. I understand it. But there are, and I'll, go to my grave with this. There are still bets that I will continuously make that I will look back and be like, no, I'm okay with that. I would have made that bet again. That's
make it tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Right? Make that tomorrow. Right. Yeah. And that's funny, right? Because it's the same people who will be like the bully at the blackjack table, who will get mad because like the lady sits down at the end of the table in the sort of cleanup position, right? And is inconsistent with her, hitting or staying, and she's hitting on 16 or she's not hitting on 16 or she's not hitting on 13 or whatever, right? It's like they all of a sudden have math degrees when it comes to probabilities, when it comes to blackjack. And like, Staley's out there playing blackjack mathematically, right? Like, he knows, right? It's like, it's not hard to, the other thing is it's incredibly frustrating is that it's not hard to understand, because if you went to any one of these people, and I'll use Terry Bradshaw as an example, because like, he sort of plays the character of the buffoon, whereas everyone else is the buffoon and is sort of like unapologetic about it. Whereas like Terry by and large is sort of playing it up. And I'm not saying that Terry understands the analytics or the mathematics behind anything. I'm just saying, like, my expectations of a guy who played quarterback in the 60s are a little bit different than my expectations of a guy who played quarterback in the 90s and so on and so forth, right? So I use Bradshaw, and if you walked up to him and you said, hey, they're on fourth and goal from the 1 yard line here. Like, what a percentage chance do you think that there is that they score this touchdown, right? Like, if you've seen any football in the last 10 years, you have to say that it's at the very minimum, like better than 50% chance, right? But even if you said 50% chance, which is obviously a low ball number,
yeah,
the expected probability there, the expected point probability there is 3.5, right? 7 if you score, 0 if you don't. 3.5 is right there in the middle. So just the act of going for it will earn you 3.5 points over the long term. And so when I'm talking about betting and us making these bets over the long term, like that's the way that we have to think about it. But the unfortunate part with the contest here is that I only have 18 weeks essentially to be able to make these plays. And so 90 games, I don't get to just make that back a little bit later on. Like that game is gone, as was the Bills game, as was the Patriots game, and any other bad beat that we've had recently. Whereas Staley knows that over the course of a long career, and I expect him to have a long career, like these things are going to work out mathematically for him, because obviously the other option being kick the field goal is 3 points. And that's assuming 100% of the time you're going to kick the field, or you're going to make the field goal. And so the three times that
not the case,
we know it's not the case, but it's certainly not the case when 2 of those field goals were chip shot field goals. And I would say 100% is pretty fair, right? Like 99.9. I'll round up to 100%. But the third one was when the Chargers were at like the 43-yard line. And the problem there is, like, if they kick the field goal, it's now like a close to 60-yard field goal, right? Like we're talking 50+ yard field goal at that point. And I don't, and speaking of like, forget the mathematics and think narrative or whatever, like Chargers special teams and history of kicking field goals, like why would you expect them to make that field goal? And so that's certainly not 100%. That's probably closer to 50%. Maybe it's a little bit better than 50%. Like maybe you look at Dustin Hopkins and you're like, man, guys really stroking these extra points. Like maybe there's a better than 50 to 60% chance he makes some 55-yarder. But like that's not how they play blackjack, right? Like that's not how they play football. And they do it over the course of a long period of time. And so the reason that people are using that ammo, because every team goes for it on 4th and 3 from the 43 or wherever it was, right? Every team does that because it's on the outside of field goal range, especially if you have a good offense and you have Justin freaking Herbert, who right now for me is a top, like, I'll just say it, I think he's the best quarterback in the league, potentially, right? And I mean, like, sort of going forward, obviously Tom Brady is Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, but he's the guy I would start a franchise with. And so you have that guy on your team, and so you have to have that belief. And even teams that have no belief in their core, I've seen the Jets go for it. We have seen the Lions go for it. We have seen all of these teams go for it. But unfortunately, what it means for the, and again, we're sort of maybe just yelling at the stupid minority, if you will, like the dumb people on Twitter who are loud about this sort of thing, because I can't imagine it's the majority of people who still sort of think this way. So maybe we're just singling those people out. Well, maybe not.
No,
you're right.
There's a lot of dumb people. But
they're
remember, like
right. But they're sort of like multiplying, like, okay, the 4th and 5 to go for the Chargers to start the game, right? Like they're using that. And then they're using the 4th and 1 at the end of the first half. And then they're also adding in that 4th and 3 as if those were all the same situation. Now I get the 4th and 5, like that's a bit spicy. You're on the 5-yard line. Like we're not talking about a 1-yard thing where, obviously with the 4th and 1, they chose to pass, but they felt like they could pass because the threat for the run was there. So the 4th and 5, you're like, well, they're throwing it here, but it's early enough in the game that if you don't get it, you can make up for it, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, it was the closest one to a touchdown, right? It was a touchdown. And unfortunately for bettors and unfortunately for Donald Parham, like he lands really, really awkwardly. Like when do you ever see that where it ends up in a situation where he's out cold? And of course he's going to drop the football. Like who's going to fault him for that? And so if you're going against that, the strategy, or you're going against the decision-making, that's one thing. But then if you're going up against the result of that decision-making, and it's off of kind of a fluke play in that he falls down so awkwardly, like I don't think when he fell down, any of us thought
I've never seen him before.
It was some dangerous thing. And then all of a sudden you see, and you're like, oh my God, like he's out cold. And then it gets even worse as far as visuals with the stretcher and whatnot. And so it's like, you're really going to beat them up about this decision where like Herbert hits the guy in the hands, he catches it and naturally goes to the ground and just does so in an awkward way and ends up dropping the football. Like that seems insane to me. Now, the one that I would have maybe kicked because like you said, you know, in sort of a reverse way, like I do think the game plays out pretty similarly if they kick it at the end of the first half, because as a lot of people noted last night, like if you don't get it, it's not like you have the penalty for the other team of field position. That being said, if you look in the first half, right, like field position didn't have any issue. You know, the Chiefs didn't have any issues with the field position there, right? And in 2021, especially with these two teams, ball possession is bigger than field position, because all it means, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, right, off the punt, again, I'm not over the punt from Nagy, it just means it's going to take him like slightly longer to score a touchdown if he's going to score a touchdown. And it's the same thing with Justin Herbert. It's the same thing with Patrick Mahomes, right? So yeah, I would maybe make that decision a little bit differently, but the other ones, every team does. The fourth and 5, no, I wouldn't say nobody, but very few do. But that early in the game, like we talk about with Staley, like he knows the game that he's in. And so I would say to him, like the thing that he made 2 mistakes, right? He made a tactical error by not going for 2 to make it a 9-point game late. And that 4th and 5 was born out of the idea that the Chiefs offense is great. And I don't think the Chiefs offense is great right now. And so the concept where we normally look at some of these teams playing the Chiefs at their peak was like, you know, we watched the Bills do it in the AFC Championship game last year, right? Like you can't kick field goals against the Chiefs. You can't do it. You know, you're bringing field goals to a touchdown fight. Like you cannot do that. And the same people yelling about that are saying that you can't go for it in this situation. And it's just nonsensical because it's like, guys, you have to pick a lane here and you have to be okay with them not getting it as part of the risk reward, understanding that, again, the math at 3.5 points at the bare minimum, as far as probabilities are concerned, is better than 3. And so it didn't work out. And even all of this stuff happening, the game still ended up in overtime. The game still ended up in Justin Herbert's hands, you know, on the outskirts of field goal range with plenty of time left on the clock. Like this wasn't, they, you know, had 3 4th downs that didn't go their way and an interception and they got blown out because of it, which is normally kind of how we frame this, where we go like the Chargers don't care if they get blown out because they're trying to win a football game. They're not trying to lose in a respectable fashion. And that's the thing that's going to keep Brandon Staley around for a long, long time. And eventually Brandon Staley and Justin Herbert as a combination, I mean, 15 plus years of those guys are going to win a Super Bowl at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, you know, your last point there was kind of how I wanted to round it out as well. Because I think, you know, people who've been listening to this pod know that I'm definitely not the numbers guy that you are by any stretch of the imagination. And sometimes I'll try to play the football guy role here, right? And say some of those things, which is a part that I didn't understand watching the game and watching some of the reaction online, where it's like, even you football people will say, it's the Chiefs. Don't you got to go out and beat the Chiefs. Yeah. Right? Like that's the narrative that we've heard for the last however many years. And so here's a team that says, this is the game that we're in. We're going to try to beat the Chiefs. And I'm not mad at that. I'm not mad at that at all. I love that. So, hey, riding with it. I get it. I understand it. It sucks. But you know what? The beauty of all of this is there's more games for us to bet on. And great. Luckily there's more games even coming up on Saturday, which is even better. The beauty of the NFL, right? That's why the NFL wins. Because no matter how disappointed I am about this, guess what? There's still money in the account and we're still cooking at the end of Saturday.
Well, it was refreshing being annoyed with like fans of football, right? Instead of like coaches making bad decisions. The refs were like decent last night. I mean, obviously the analyst thing, it's rough, but it was, you know, I mean, there's always somebody to be annoyed at when it comes to football stuff. Like it was at least nice that the sort of hot takes were coming from off of the field and they did allow the teams to play how they wanted to play. Like it wasn't just flags everywhere. You know, I mean, there was obviously some key injuries here and there, especially to Derwin James, but like at least they allowed it to sort of happen out on the field with the coaches making their decisions and the players being able to play and showcasing those two guys last night.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the funny thing is it's like laughing at the people who are bragging that you covered an over field goal spread in overtime. Right. As if like that's just normal-ish that happens. Right. Yeah. But anyways, let's keep things going here because there's a lot of games to get to. And before we get to some of our best bets, we want to talk a little bit about some of the bigger games that we might be looking at heading into this weekend. And as mentioned, there's a pretty big game on Saturday night involving the 9-4 Pats at the 7-6 Colts. Colts at home, favored by 2.5 points. Primetime Saturday night, Carson Wentz and the Colts against Belichick and the Pats. Yes, I said Carson Wentz and the Colts just to see your reaction, because I know it's not about Carson Wentz, but sometimes I just like to see your reaction and make you smile, my dude. Right?
I just like it when you say Carson Wentz, because I know you just love him so much, and it's right? Just that's like my dude. You guys are family at this point. So that's yeah,
my quarterbacks in this first week of fantasy football playoffs, Carson Wentz and Patty Mahomes. So hey, here we are. I can't believe I'm saying this. I really, really can't believe I'm saying this. Mm-hmm. And I'll get into how weird I find, you're going to hear me say this a lot throughout this pod, how weird I find a lot of these lines.
Right.
But I can't believe I like the Colts in this game. And I don't really understand. The line seems odd to me, right? At 2.5, I'm like, okay, I can't believe the Colts. My starting point is always, what do I think of these two teams? Right. Then I look at the line and I'm like, okay, if it was 3.5 Colts were favored, I'd have a little less interest in taking the Colts, but I just feel as if the Colts know who they are for sure. And what I mean by that is they're not going to put Carson Wentz in a lot of positions to fail. Right. And if they are, it's the Joe Flacco offense. Right. So in that scenario, I like their defense. Their defense is playing well. I think this is just going to be a really good game. And my lean, I would hope this is where the stock market thing comes in. And I know you listened to our talk with Colin a couple of days ago.
It did. Yeah, it was great.
The stock market line of it. And that's where I look at a line like this. And I say, if this got to 3, I'd completely switch and probably go to the Pats. But at 2.5, I'm still likely to land on the Colts. That's what I'm thinking. But as you can tell, I'm not that confident in it. So this is where you come in and help me out, because I need your help, my dude.
Yeah. I know Colin has sort of a history in that. Colin, I've had some chats before. He's a great guy. But you and I talk buy low, sell high all the time, right? And that's just fundamental stock stuff right there. So we are no, it's no secret to us that that's sort of the premise of any NFL betting market here. And so
totally.
I think this game's incredibly interesting because the look ahead line for this game was Patriots -2.5. And both teams had a bye last week. And now it's Colts -2.5. It's like, nobody played last week for anybody to have some drastic shift in there.
Was there another league? Did they play in their own Grey Cup last week that we missed? Did some alternate universe? What happened?
Right. It was the slightly lighter than Grey Cup. Yeah. So or darker. I don't know. Listen, okay. I'll just put it this way. For me, from a betting standpoint, I'm sitting here right now. I'm like, I don't know who to take from an ATS standpoint, but I'll take the Patriots in a teaser. I'll start my week with a little +8, +8.5 with the Patriots and take my chances that Carson Wentz can not blow out the Patriots, but comfortably beat them. But once we get into a field goal wins it type of a situation, I think there's a reason this game is going to be really awesome. And when it comes to teaser legs, you want certainty on both sides, right? You want the line to be really tight. You want maybe even some uncertainty, around the money line, right? If this was 2.5 or 2 for the Patriots, the way that it was last week, I'd be teasing up the Colts. It's strictly a numbers thing where it's I think this game's close. I think we have a pretty reliable understanding of both of these teams. And if one of them wants to win by 9 points, I'll tip my cap and and allow them to do so, right?
So here's my question for you then, right? So how does the line change that much with neither team playing? Is that just sharps looking at the line, the big money coming in, looking at the line and making their call, this is who we think is going to win, and that completely swings it? Is it just that simple?
Right. Yeah. That is sort of the functionality of it, right? The answer to all of your questions is money, right? And so the money comes in on the Colts and moves that up to where it stands now. Right. And so clearly last week, the purpose of the look ahead line, the purpose of the openers that have low limits is to get an idea of, is my line correct? Like you and I, we talk about like the idea of just putting two random teams. We could go outside right now and go watch a pickup game at the court around the corner from me. And we could just sit there, set up shop and say one team's favored by 4.5 and take bets on it. And maybe somebody with an opinion comes in and bets that up, bets that down. But that's how we learn what's correct about our point spread, right? And of course, in the NFL, you have a full week to adjust your handle and adjust. We talked about this all on Tuesday. And so clearly that look ahead line, like people were like, yeah, we're going to take the Colts if we're getting them plus money on the money line or plus any amount of points. And so obviously that gets sort of refreshed in the bookmaker's mind that like we went a little too hard here on the Patriots after they beat the Bills, because right now, what are we basing all of this stuff off of, right? We're basing it, a lot of it off of beating the Bills without throwing a pass. And then everything that happened before that, which led us to believe going into that Bills game that the Patriots were probably overvalued as only 2.5 underdogs going into that Bills game. Now the wind hit and we didn't really learn anything necessarily about those two teams from a neutral site standpoint, right? Like if the Bills and Patriots played again on a neutral site, we just watched Josh Allen go for 400 plus yards against the Bucks this past week, right? Ground and passing combined. And so I'd like to think that there's going to be a little bit of a difference if those two teams happen to play indoors. Now they're never going to get to play indoors. So the only thing that we have is some sort of comparative type thing. And all we have to compare right now really is Colts blew out the Bills, in Buffalo, and Patriots beat them without throwing the football. Right. So it's like, okay, we don't really know a ton there, but we know at the very least that the Colts can compete with the Bucks. They obviously can compete with the Bills and some of these other teams, right, that we've seen the Colts hang with. And so I think we know that they're better than their record says there is. And I think there's a chance maybe the Patriots aren't necessarily as good as their 7-8 games where they've covered in a row here. But of course, I imagine if the Patriots played the Bucks again at home, I imagine if the Patriots played the Cowboys again at home, two of their more significant games that they lost, I imagine the point spreads now would be a little bit different than them being 6.5 point underdogs to the Bucks at home and 4 point underdogs to the Cowboys at home. Right. And so, you and I were on both of the Patriots in both of those games because it was sort of like, it's almost you predict in the future, like, will this point spread be different in the future? Let's get in front of that because that's kind of the whole point of a market, right? That's the buying low element. And so I think a lot of people are just a lot of entities, if you will, are buying low here on the Colts or at very least selling high on the Patriots. Now, obviously it gets to a point where it kind of goes too far. And I think you're right. If this got to 3, then a lot of people, because again, not everybody has the same opinion necessarily. And if you start seeing the line go up, you're not going to jump on the Patriots. You're going to wait and see how high it goes before you jump on the Patriots here. So I'm seeing a couple of 2s out there right now. So maybe 2.5 is as far as it went here. But for me, 2.5 is something that you tease and get yourself sort of started on Sunday, or at least started Saturday night into Sunday with a nice teaser leg. Now, no guarantees that actually wins. But again, if we think that New England maybe deserves a couple extra points here or is not getting credit enough here with the Colts, being 2.5 point favorites, that's obviously a ton of value there for that teaser leg. But I don't disagree. Like, I can't say, everybody's wrong here and the Colts aren't going to win this game. There's a very real possibility. You're sitting back and going I can't believe I bet on Carson Wentz against Bill Belichick and his defense. But there's also a possibility that the defense might be still a little bit overrated because we have seen them get run on by the Titans. We have seen them lose to Jameis Winston and the Saints back, 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, whatever it is now. Obviously the season's really starting to grind on me. I'm losing the concept of who played when on what week. But the point is there have been instances where the team hasn't been that good. Now, I'm a buyer on the Patriots in general. That, even though, we have seen obviously bye week last week, but the Bills situation from the week prior. So again, conflicting issues for me on this game, but I think it's really, and obviously an incredibly interesting game from a line movement standpoint, given that neither of these teams played and the line moved so drastically. And obviously Saturday night, everybody's going to be watching it. It's just another sort of highlight game that we're all going to be rallied around here. And hopefully it doesn't get screwed up by the various forces that screw things up in the NFL these days.
Oh, yes. There's been a lot of stuff messing with the NFL as of late, for sure. I'm sure. I mean, that might be a talking point at some point throughout this pod. Yeah, the 2.5 point spread, the 2.5 point spread is an interesting one. Is there's another game, including the Bengals and Broncos, both teams sitting at 7-6 on the year, but the Broncos are favored at home, 2.5 points. Now, the Bengals, for me, have turned into one of the weirdest teams to bet on a week in, week out basis because, they've just been kind of up and down. But on the flip side, the Broncos covered a massive spread last week, but that was against the Lions. I'm leaning on the points here and the Bengals, and I know this is not one of your best bet games.
Sure.
But is there a side that you're leaning to more so, or is it just kind of the same principle as the last game in terms of, hey, it's 2.5 points, tease that up for the Bengals?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Like this does, but it also has a blackjack element to it as well, right? Because I think this game is very similar, where it's like the better team. I think most people think is the Bengals, and I'm not saying that's wrong. In the same way that I wouldn't say it's wrong if you thought that the Patriots on a neutral field were a better team than the Colts. Which, if that's the case, even a 2.5 point spread here is too high because home field advantage just is not 2.5, even in two places where it kind of feels like it should be a little bit more than average. And so I built in 2 points for Denver. I built in 2 points for the Colts, right? But that still only gets me to a round pick 'em, right? Because again, I think the Bengals are better than the Broncos, and I think the Patriots are a little bit better than the Colts. Again, but it's one game, anything can happen here. And we're seeing the same thing where this line keeps trickling up and up and up and even hit 3. And so I actually did bet on the Bengals once it hit 3 because it's just like, that's too much, right? But again, I think at 2.5, it becomes a nice added teaser leg. But the blackjack element to all of this is, I think if you bet the Colts, you kind of have to bet the Broncos. And I think if you bet if you bet the Patriots, you kind of have to bet, not that they're intertwined like this. I'm not saying parlay these two together because if one wins, the other has to win. It's like, if you're going to hit on 16, right? Like you're going to have to hit on 16 now. You're on Saturday night, hit on 16. If you're going to do that, well, you got to hit on 16 on Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, right? Like that's the principle in all of this, because I think these games shake down the same way from a market standpoint. Obviously, different teams, yada, yada, yada. I mean, Cincinnati's element where, like they fluctuate from looking really, really good to really, really bad. Like that can be dicey from a teaser standpoint, but Denver is one of those teams that it's going to be played pretty close to the vest here. Right. So you're not going to get a ton of blowouts when it comes to the Broncos unless the other team's ravaged by COVID, which we've seen a couple of issues with the Bengals. Who knows? Anything can happen here in the next couple of days, as it seems like every hour something has happened in the National Football League, and it's infuriating.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Saturday, the other game on Saturday, other than the Colts and Pats, has a 7-6 Browns at home to the 6-7 Raiders. And I say the Browns, but really, I don't know if this is the Cleveland Browns, as their coach is in COVID protocols. Their top 2 QBs are in COVID protocols. Who's starting for them? I think they announced who's their third stringer that's going to start for them?
Matt Russell. Matt Russell is starting for them on Saturday. I've got a flight here at the end. Okay. So I'm just going to hop right in here because I could talk about this and all of everything that's happened with this for a while. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I just want to kind of go through where my head was at for this game. And we're going to get to a point here at the end, I promise, mostly. So this game opens 6, right? And so a lot of people will say, hey, it goes both ways as far as early betting or, early week betting in the time of COVID. And obviously this week being like the craziest one of the season, where you're just kind of like hoping for the best when you're making a bet, right? And so a lot of people say it's just as likely that your bet turns out to be really valuable versus not valuable at all, right? But the problem is, for the vast majority of us, we're not the last necessarily to know, but we're certainly too late, right? The sports books always know beforehand, right? And even if they don't know, there's some implications, right? Like there's some sort of one guy is hurt or one guy's got COVID. Okay. It's a lot like the Lamar Jackson thing where we're like, well, this Lamar Jackson injury against the Bears, line's a little bit low here. Like what's going on? And then we find out and it just starts to plummet over the course of the week. Same kind of deal here because the Browns opened -6 in this game. And a full squad Browns team, like that's too low. That's too low against the Las Vegas Raiders right now, right? Like that number has to be 7, has to be 7.5. Like there's just no way that 6 is the appropriate number. So I could show up on Sunday night or Monday morning and be like, oh man, like hitting the Browns -6, like that's a great number. It's going to go to 7. Like that's what I would do in a normal season, in a normal week, even earlier on this season. Problem is, I don't know that the one guy that the sports books know have COVID, or the 2 or 3 guys has COVID, because sometimes it's just a guy, and sometimes it's just 2 or 3 guys, and then sometimes it's 25 guys, right? And I don't know that it's going to be 25 guys, and so now I'm sitting there at -6 going, oh man, like I thought I made a really good bet based on all the principles that we discuss and that how we're supposed to do this on a week-to-week basis, only to find out that my bet is basically garbage 4 days later because of all of this other stuff. And then you go, okay, well, who's actually playing? Who's actually not playing? And so the first wave of guys that come out, it's like a bunch of guys on the offensive line. You go, okay, that's not ideal because the Browns are sort of based around their offensive line. But the line comes down to where the Raiders were essentially favored by 1 point. And you go, okay, like that's not that big of a deal. And then of course, Baker Mayfield is one of the gets included in sort of the next flurry of COVID positives. And so you sit there and you go, okay, hang on a sec here. You and I have been talking about for weeks. We don't even want Baker Mayfield starting at the quarterback position, right? So like that doesn't do anything for us. In fact, it actually makes us a little bit more interested in the Browns, even though the line is headed the other way. Kevin Stefanski, right? Head coach. Oh no, head coach is out with COVID. Didn't seem to be that much of an issue when they beat the Steelers in Pittsburgh in the playoffs last year. So you go, okay, I'm not going to get that worked up about that either. And you go through the list. There's all, like I said, handful of guys that aren't that relevant. And the ones that were relevant, right, are Wyatt Teller and Jedrick Wills, right? The 2 offensive line players there, right? And you go, okay, at least the Browns have had offensive line injury issues all season long. And so that it isn't just necessarily guys off the street. Meanwhile, we just watched the Chargers offense do quite fine with not their 2 starting offensive tackles from the start of the season, right? With Pipkins and Storm Norton on the outside, right? So all of that is to say, okay, was 6-7 points, was that move enough of a move? And so yesterday, as I'm ready to put in my, I almost said the casino name. My contest picks because I had to you have to get every pick in if you're playing the Thursday night game. I almost pulled the trigger on the Browns +1. And then as I'm just about to do it, it's 5:30 Eastern time ish, Case Keenum gets popped and a couple other guys get popped, right? And then the line moves even more down to 3.5, 4. So the point of all of this is like, this stuff is brutal, but you have to take each individual position and sort of decide how important it is relative to where the market is going. So right now, this game can be had at +4 for the Browns. And even though it's now Nick Mullins as the starting quarterback, I know everybody's disappointed that I'm not out there running the offense. Your old San Francisco 49er running mate, Nick Mullins is out there. I think he's probably serviceable. Like he just played in the league last year. Like it's not, you know, again, can he do the same stuff? And again, it depends on the bar, right? Is the bar a 6-7 point win the way it was back on Sunday? No. Is it even a win at all? No, it's just keep this close, right? And as long as
against the Raiders team that like we were talking about 1, 2, 3 Cancun, just like
yes,
a couple days ago.
And that's the other element, because while they're not ravaged by COVID, they're ravaged by disease, the disease of stinking, right? The disease of just being bad. And they don't have Darren Waller, who's obviously a massive difference maker when it comes to that team. This is a team that's essentially averaging like 17 points a game over this, like you said, 1, 2, 3 Cancun stretch. Like, what am I afraid of when it comes to the Raiders on the road in Cleveland in the middle of December? Like, this isn't the cozy confines of Las Vegas. This isn't even the cozy confines of Jerry World in Dallas. Like, what am I afraid of here? And And so the good news is at least we've sort of waited and waited and waited. And now we can functionally make a bet at +4 on the Cleveland Browns and feel pretty good about it. And by the way, of course, the NFL starts moving stuff around and like they're, you gotta play the shell game here when you're the NFL. And maybe they get some of these guys back, right? And if they get Jedrick Wills back or Wyatt Teller, like that's a bet that's going to be really valuable come Saturday afternoon. I know it's sort of crazy to say because you spend a whole week going like, oh, Browns, gross, like don't want anything to do with betting them. But it's different at -6 than it is at +4 when all you've done is go from Baker Mayfield to Nick Mullins. Okay. There are cases to be made that those two quarterbacks are also equal, right? If we actually like Case Keenum better than we like this version of Baker Mayfield, I'm not ruling out that Nick Mullins is about as good in this offense as Baker Mayfield is, right? So I don't even take that much of a downgrade from one to the other because at least Mullins has been in the room for a little while. It's the offensive line injuries, and now the secondary issues are obviously prominent as well. But again, the bar is different here. And so I'm actually going to make a bet on the Browns here at +4 because this is, it's got to be as bad as it gets, right? Like it can't get any worse. I shouldn't say that out loud. But like, again, obviously if Clowney and Garrett and JOK and like some of those guys got banged for this, like that would be a different story. But at +4, like the Raiders are 4-point favorites against a team that like they're still like, hopefully still functional, at least offensively.
Yeah. And I think, as we move off, because we're not here to try to break down COVID talks or anything like that at all. Yeah. But my one thing that I will say to remind people about is that the way that the headlines have been working for the most part, everyone's getting lumped into this person's going into COVID protocols, which doesn't mean that this person tested positive, which doesn't mean that this person is out for the next week. Like it just means they're in the protocols. And there's a lot of variance in between what that actually means. Right.
And yes. And in the specifics of it too, as it pertains to this sort of market handicap, if you will, Wills and Teller are reported to be vaccinated. Right. And we don't know, and they don't have to take those tests until I believe Friday at 4 p.m. So as much as the headlines are, which you know how headlines work, and everybody who's listening to this knows how headlines work, right? Grab the attention of the reader. The headlines are the list of guys who are in the protocol. And then like come Friday night and Saturday, right? Guys start getting removed. We see it all the time in the NFL, right? Like Mike Williams, for instance, last week, right? He ended up playing in that game against the Giants. And it was like, well, I thought he was in the protocol. It's like, well, he tested negative twice because I guess he was vaccinated, like that type of thing. That the difference between the headline and the sort of, I don't want to say scare because like there's no real purpose to it other than like read our stuff here. It just has to be reminded, like, it's not over, right? It doesn't mean like all these guys are in the protocols. No one has been labeled out necessarily. Now, as you sort of get the Thursday guys like Baker Mayfield, for example, and maybe the Friday guys getting popped too, like, yes, those guys are out for Saturday, but the guys who are vaccinated can still be in. And so if we're buying at a market here at +4 and the offensive line guys are back in, it starts to feel a lot like that Broncos Thursday night game when it comes to the Browns, right? Where it turns into like a 17-14 kind of sluggy type fest situation there. And again, when you're getting 4 points, that's great. I will happily take that.
I got you for sure. And let's get to some of the best bets and some of your best leans and angles. And, as you mentioned, the contest contenders, I'll say with air quotes. But let's talk about this because I'm super interested in a lot of the games this week because there's some massive spreads. There's across the board this week in the NFL, which is funny to me because we talked about it last week and how odd it was that the big favorites covered last week. And so you come into this week and there's a lot of like 8-point spreads, 9-point spreads, double-digit spreads. And it's just like, whoa. Yeah. But we'll get there. Let's start here with 2-11 teams.
Yeah.
You got the Jags at home favored by 5, sitting nicely in the Vegas zone. And, is this line just based on the Jags players reacting to your boy Herb being out? Because the Vegas zone could also just be referring to wherever Herb is partying this week. Is this a chance for like the new coach bump here? Where the Jags are laying 5 points? Like, okay, break out the Jags.
Yes, this is absolutely what this is, right? And it's funny. I mean, there's been times where I've bet a team on the new coach bunch. I can remember the one from Bill O'Brien last year, and it was ironically against the Jags, and it was just like you just watch Bill O'Brien, and I don't know if anybody, I'm sure some of you have seen the Man in the Arena, Tom Brady series, right? And Bill O'Brien was prominently involved in the one this week where they called him the teapot, right? Because he's got that type of temper or whatever. And I imagine that wore thin for the Houston Texans, right? And they ended up winning that game and covering that game last year when Romeo Crennel was the interim head coach, right? Which is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And here we are with Houston and Jacksonville up against each other here again. And so a couple of different things. So let's go through the week, right? It's 3.5 to start, and that's with Herb as the head coach. And I think a lot of people, and I was fully expecting us to come on the show here today and you be like, 2 trash teams, take the points, right? And me having to be like, well, no, like not necessarily. Because there's a reason that it was 3.5, right? Like the Jags are, from a talent standpoint and all of that sort of thing, like the much better team than the Houston Texans. Like keep in mind, like this Houston Texans team lost to the Jets at home. Like this Texans team is atrocious. Now, obviously, Herb is getting the headlines for all of the stuff. And I mean, the headlines are hilarious and ridiculous and embarrassing to the NFL, to the coaching profession, to the ownership profession, if that's a profession, and all of the above, right? We talk about, everybody's talking about the 32, there's 32 of these jobs, and you gave one to Joe Judge, and you gave one to Matt Nagy, and you gave one to Urban Meyer, right? And it's like, how do we screw this up over and over and over again? But he also gave one to David Culley. And yeah, he's not kicking the kicker, but you and I talked about it, like Justin Reed, Cunningham, Zach Cunningham, like these guys, these veteran guys on this team getting suspended or flat out cut from the team. And so we just look at those two things, those two sort of actions, and we go, okay, is that a Justin Reed, Zach Cunningham problem? Or is that a coaching issue? Right? Like, is there something that, are they just all of a sudden like bad guys? Or is something going on within that locker room where they have maybe teapotted themselves, right? Where they have gone off the handle because of things being so, badly run in the Texans organization. There's a very real chance the Texans' inner workings are just as garbage as the Jacksonville Jaguars' inner workings without the level of talent that the Jacksonville Jaguars have. So they go and they fire Herb, and everybody swings in and bumps the Jags number up to 4.5, 5, 5.5. And there, everybody sort of goes like, okay, we can't go to 6. Like, let's not get crazy. Right. And so then you just go, for me, I just go, okay, if they're going to get this coaching bump here or the Herb effect, I need to see some indications beforehand. And what do we get? Right? We get Darrell Bevell, one of the assistant coaches who are allegedly worse than his coaches at Bowling Green from back in the day. And which is an amazing, like the Bowling Green assistant coaches are like, hey man, like we got you the Utah job, bro. Like, what are you doing?
We catching strays, right?
Like, we're catching strays out here. Like, come on, we're just a MAC assistant coach. Like, I didn't do it. I'm just sitting here. Anyway, so Darrell Bevell comes in, right? And he says something to the effect, and obviously James Robinson, a hot button topic, speaking of fantasy football, like RIP to pretty much anybody who had James Robinson on their team as well. You should have. But he says, like, James Robinson is our starting running back, and he will be treated as such. He will be used as such. And I love the phrase "as such" at the end, because that's just got that extra like little thing to it, right? Where it's like, just jam it in there with a little bit of extra. And so Darrell Bevell obviously is sort of taking shots at Herb as he goes out the door, right? And then Trevor Lawrence he literally talks about how like it's brought a clarity and a focus to the team. Well, this is a team I've watched play football that has had no clarity and no focus. And so if that ends up being true, they're probably going to blow out the Texans, right? Because the offense is going to be crisp, because it doesn't really have to be against the Texans, right? It doesn't require that much. And like I've always said, the defense is actually pretty good. And I watched an unbelievable amount of that Titans Jags game in live time last week because we were on the Titans in that game. And the Titans had a problem sort of separating from the Jags. And the only thing that kept them from sort of getting into that game was Lawrence kept throwing interceptions. Well, maybe if they're using James Robinson, like I've been asking to do all season long, and many of us have, and he's able, and maybe there's a clarity and focus where the Marvin Joneses of the world and the Laviska Shenaults of the world aren't dropping passes and running bad routes, then yeah, like there's no reason not to like the Jags here. And I don't think this number has moved up enough because this number again was 3.5 before he got fired. And so if you're sitting there going like, yeah, it's too high now because like I really think like 4 and 5 are a strong possibility. Like, yeah, obviously though that can, it can land on those two numbers. But yeah, if the whole process is that we're going to see the Jags at their full sort of expectation this week, then we have to now look back to week 1. And you'll recall, week 1, the glory days of this podcast where we went undefeated. And one of those undefeated moves was that we were on the Houston Texans at home because they were getting 3.5 points from the Jags. And all of that, the fact that the Texans won that game is not the point here. The point here is that the Jags were 3.5 point favorites in that game. And so what has happened since then is just the dissension and the drag down of Urban Meyer. But the point is we went into that game looking at the roster and going like, Jags should be favored on the road by 3.5 points. Now, we necessarily didn't agree with that because of Meyer or whatever, but if you take Meyer out of the equation, then maybe you're taking all of essentially the results since then. And now we have to look back at that and go, okay, well, if there were 3.5 points on the road against the Texans, what should the number be if they're at home? Well, I don't have much home field advantage in Jacksonville. I don't have much home field advantage in the Texans, maybe a point each. But there you go. That's how you get to 5.5, right? One for going to neutral and the next for going to Jacksonville. And that's how you land on 5.5, right? So again, nothing's happened this season that has us saying like the Texans are any better than we thought they were in week 1, right? Like it's still, their value is still the same. Their rating is still the same. And the Jags, by the way, this is a team that was a 6.5 win total team at the start of the year. Now they're never coming close to 6.5, but that's what we thought of this roster before we realized that Herb was going to murder this team from the inside. So like, this is a 6.5 win roster here that we all agreed on because you had ample opportunity to bet the under before the season started. So while not much has changed for the Texans, obviously we have dragged the Jags down, but I think the Jags can get bumped back up. I think this is probably the best game they play all season. And I think that means a touchdown plus victory for the Jags this week, which is crazy to say out loud, but this is how it works, man, especially in the NFL.
Even crazier, like I have to start 2 QBs this week, and I'm thinking that I might start Trevor Lawrence over Carson Wentz.
Sure.
Right. And I'm just like, I never thought that would be a thing. But once Herb went out, I was like, wait a second here.
Just a second here. Everybody gets better when Herb is gone.
Right. Let's keep things moving though. And you mentioned the Titans earlier, 9-4 Titans at the 5-6-1 Steelers. Last I saw this was at a pick'em game. And I was kind of confused by that, but hey, at the end of the day, I mean, I feel like I'm going to ride with the Titans. And I don't know if I don't know if I'm just that sour on the Steelers, which definitely could be it, but I know they've been playing a little bit more functional as of late, let's say, Big Ben looking a little less washed and considering where he was coming from.
Well, it depends on what half you watched too against the Vikings, right? First half, watched, and it's like, a little bit better now, and it's like a half later. Right. That's interesting to me. I saw this line, and again, for as rough as some of these results, but certainly end game results have been the last couple of weeks with some of these bad beats or whatever. Like, I still have a pretty good feel for the market. And that was confirmed for me with this game because this game opened Titans by 2. Ooh. And I thought that was a mistake myself, but for the other reason, I thought the Steelers should be favored in this game. I think the Steelers win this game against the Titans. I don't, again, watched an alarming amount of the Titans last week, as much as we got the cover because the Jags were 1-2-3 Cancooning or 1-2-3, just downstate. Yeah, like I'm not there with the Titans. Like, yeah, that was by and large a Jack's fade last week. And nothing that I saw like really got me all that excited about the Titans. They didn't run the ball the way that I thought they were going to be able to run the ball. And certainly Tannehill didn't pass the way that I was thinking that the run game was going to open up the pass game for him. And so now that Titans team has to go on the road to Pittsburgh. And again, Pittsburgh, they lose that game, but I was impressed with the second half and just the idea that like they could have absolutely phoned that game in. Roethlisberger could have not bothered to come out for the second half and all of that stuff. And listen, I'm on record as saying the Pittsburgh Steelers might be a better team indoors right now with Ben Roethlisberger's age being what it is. But I just think that defensively, the Steelers are going to be fine here against the Titans. And I think offensively, they're going to do enough as well. Like this is the desperation element of the Steelers, right? And it's not going to work out necessarily all the time. And they certainly didn't have that in the first half against the Vikings. But anytime they go and they lose that game, and yet they are still in the mix, like this is where you want to back the Steelers. And so I'm sort of heartened by the fact that this line has gone to pick them. And I don't know if it's going to fully cross over and the Steelers are going to be -1. Certainly don't think that they should be -3 or anything like that. But if they were the ones who opened -2, I certainly wouldn't have been surprised by that. And so I actually like the Steelers a lot. And along with the Jags, these are two plays that I did in fact put in for the contest on Thursday, along with our ill-gotten Chargers wager. So I like the Steelers here a ton, and which is not something that you've heard a ton from me this season. Again, I still have some major question marks about this Titans team and a Jags game that was supposed to be a get right that looked like a get right on the scoreboard. I just don't think it was from how that game was played on the football field.
And this is an interesting one because it falls in line with a lot of what I love about doing this pod. And that's the figuring out where the line is, where it's coming from, and where it could be going. Right. So like my perception of it, that it started out at Titans -2 and has swung to even, obviously changes my opinion a lot just because it shows just kind of everyone's perception of it. And then once you let some of the other people come in and have their say in terms of what they think of both of these teams, dig a little deeper. And as we like to say, sometimes I come out on the other end being convinced. Watching, finding myself sitting here on Sunday rooting for washed Big Ben again. Let's go. Let's get to some of these big time spreads though, because as I said, this week is weird. There's a lot of like big spreads, and we talked a little bit about it on Tuesday. And again, last week, just about there's a lot of teams in the 1-2-3 Cancun mode, especially as we're in the middle of December, right around Christmas time. There's a lot of reasons why we could be seeing a lot of these big spreads. And we'll start here. 3-10 Jets at 6-7 Dolphins. Dolphins favored by 9.5 points, right? That's a lot of points. And my initial inkling would be to take the Jets here and the points, but I just feel like they'll keep it close for a bit and then ultimately just like be the Jets. So I'm on the Dolphins here at 9.5.
Oh, okay. I'm on the Jets. I mean, I don't love it. I'm not getting like excited about this, whatever, by any stretch.
Who's going to say they love the Jets? Nobody's going to say
honestly. And that's fair. And I missed out potentially, and who knows if it comes back, but I missed out on the +10 that was available for a little while this week.
You could have talked me into that.
Right? Like +10 sounds a lot more palatable than +9, +9.5. Right. But obviously that came off because some get in line, right? Another COVID situation, not a drastic one, but Jalen Waddle's a pretty big deal, right? To the Miami offense, especially, short passing game, that sort of thing. And so I still don't see the Dolphins as this team. Like, yes, they might blow them out this week. It's the Jets. Anything is possible, right? But like, they're not a team that is necessarily blowing a ton of teams out, right? Like, yeah, they won a game pretty comfortably against the Giants, but like that was like pulling teeth with regards to actually blowing that team out. Like they won by 8 at home against the Texans, right? Like this just isn't a team that's like building a huge lead and then like shutting it down. Now, again, Jets might be 1-2-3 Cancun mode, right? Like they might just be South Beaching it all week. And then obviously you fly in the day before, so that's not necessarily the case, right? The biggest overestimation, right, is anybody thinking that anybody on an NFL team is doing anything in any of these cities that they go to, since they are there for so little time. I mean, there's not a ton to like necessarily about the Jets on the field. Like, I'm not going to tell you like there's anything to love necessarily there, right? But this is just like a Dolphins team that is going to play a little bit of a stickier, like keep it close and then just kind of win in the end type of a team. There's going to be a lot of field goals, right? Like that kind of thing. You could sell me on the idea that they win by exactly 9 because they kicked 3 extra field goals than the Jets, right? Like that wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for this game. So I just don't know that the Miami Dolphins should be favored by like double digits against anyone, which is why I liked the 10. Now that it's down to 9, like I'm not going to be like dissuaded that much. It didn't end up making my card as far as the contest goes. So, I'm not loving it to that degree, but it is a game that at least at this point, like I am looking at that and have a decided side in that game. And that is, crazily enough, with the Jets.
No, I find that super interesting. And I like the point of, the 3 extra field goals and looking at it that way. And it's a reminder to me. No, it's a reminder to me because I kind of flipped the mentality that I was having for the majority of the season, which was I'm taking the points, talk me out of it. And then now as we get later on in the season, and especially around Christmas time, where it's very easy to be distracted, right? Like these people are humans. There's a lot going on. The Cancun mode comes up, right? So it's almost like the other way now where it's talk me out of taking the favorites, talk me out of the Jets being in Cancun mode, right? So the totally extra half point there at 9.5, you could talk me into taking the Jets there with that extra half point.
Let's see if we can get the 10, right? Like nobody make a bet on 9.5. Like, let's just see if the 10 comes back, 10. Right? Okay. Just wait for the 10. Strategy. I think we get the 10 at some point, somewhere, somehow. Let's get the 10.
We're above 10 in terms of our next game here, as a 10-3 Cards are 12.5 point favorites at the Detroit Lions, who are sitting at a nice 1-11 this season.
And one. 1-11-1.
How did I
come on, man?
That out?
The great tie.
I'm sorry.
How dare you? They worked hard for that tie.
My bad. I'm sorry to disrespect the Detroit Lions. I apologize to Jalen Rose and Jared Goff's girlfriend and my guy. What's their coach's name? Why am I drawing a blank right now? How am I forgetting?
Dan Campbell.
Dan Campbell. How am I forgetting
Anthony
about
Lynn, offensive coordinator that isn't allowed to call plays.
I'm sorry that I disrespected you guys and took away your hard-earned tie. My bad. Yeah. But in terms of this spread, minus 12.5. Maybe I'm overreacting to the big spreads here. I don't like the Cards, right? Like I feel like last week the Cards kind of, it was a bit of a reality check for a lot of the league. And we were talking about like, who are the Cards and all that. Yeah. And I look at them now and you're favored by 12.5 points, which is a lot of points. And I'm going to say, if it wasn't the Cancun mode that I'm worried about here, like Dan Campbell's act might be wearing thin at the end of the year here, where it's like, yeah, we get it. We got our one win, bro. Like whatever. But I don't know. I feel like I want to lay the points here. It sounds ridiculous because I can't believe I want to even say laying 12.5 points with the Cards team I don't even really like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, yeah, I do. And well, listen, the reason to lay the points would be under the sort of little known rule that our Survivor entry that got knocked out on the Cowboys has won convincingly ever since in sort of, obviously pointless fashion. And we would be on the Cardinals. I would normally be sitting here telling you Cardinals Survivor pick, like just walk away from this game. And based on the previous 3 games that have won really easily, that means the Cardinals are going to win really easily. However, when we're talking about the 12.5 to 13 points that you can get right now with the Detroit Lions against a Cardinals team, might be reeling a little bit. Short week, big time game. Unfortunately, they lost that game for them. And in a lot of cases, you think that you're going to get an inspired effort the next week after a loss. I just don't think the Lions are going to inspire that type of an effort. And thus, this is going to fall into the lap of the Lions here, who I don't think are tired of Dan Campbell, right? Like this isn't a call for this man to be fired situation. Like as crazy as it sounds, like this is a guy who in indefinitely is going to be on this team, coaching this team. Like he is going to be back next year. And I like watching the Lions play because they're going for it, maybe a little too aggressively. They're doing it without any talent whatsoever. So it's like the anti-Chargers, and like the whole thing is completely wild. And the DeAndre Hopkins injury is a really big deal. And like, that's another blow, right?
Know about that. My bad.
You forgot about our man's DeAndre Hopkins out for the regular season here with the knee injury. And like, that's a big deal, man. Like that's when we watch the Cardinals and everybody gets excited about the Cardinals and starts power ranking them number one. Well, we just sit back and we go, Buccaneers are the best team in the league, guys. Buccaneers are the best team in the league, guys. And everybody's like, the Cardinals, they're 10-2. They got the greatest thing ever. Like Colt McCoy is winning games. It's like, like all of that stuff is great, and like the record's cool and all of that sort of thing, but like we're still waiting for a game other than the Rams game on the road where they were sort of definitively the better team on the football field as constructed. It just kind of comes down to when we're watching this team, it's Kyler Murray makes crazy play, DeAndre Hopkins makes crazy play. You go, oh man, you can't even with these guys. You just can't, right? It was the same thing with the Chiefs last night. Tyreek Hill making crazy play. Patrick Mahomes makes crazy play. But that wasn't the win or loss on the game, right? It was sort of a little bit more basic type concept of get Travis Kelce the ball when Derwin James is out of the game. Like it's the basics that matter in football when it comes to wins and losses and blowing teams out. I just don't think the Cardinals are a team right now that's going to blow a ton of teams out. And so if the Lions care at all about this game, we've watched teams be able to run against the Cardinals. I watched it against the Bears, right? The Bears lost that game because Andy Dalton kept throwing interceptions and giving the Cardinals a short field. The Browns lost to the Cardinals because they got getting penalty flags called on them for hitting Kyler Murray barely, and he was drawing roughing the passer calls left, right, and center. Now, I know that's a simplification. They obviously didn't win just because of that. But the point is here is like, I think the Lions can hang in with this Cardinals team that is probably not that into this game. They've got a Christmas game coming up against the Colts next week. Like this is a very much just kind of throw it in the middle of the schedule. And you don't have DeAndre Hopkins there to bail you out with a couple of crazy plays here. I think this game just ends up being a little bit tighter than most people sort of give it credit for. My number's not crazy. It's not like I make this like 7 or 8.5 or something like that. It's just like I make it about 11.5 without DeAndre Hopkins, right? Which isn't necessarily a key number, but if you can get the 13, which is widely available right now, I'm absolutely taking the Lions in this game.
I totally feel like, couldn't the line get even higher? Like once we get to Sunday and people are just like, nah, it's the Lions. Like,
I think the Hopkins injury probably prevents that. I would.
That. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's the same thing where the whole COVID thing in general, right? Like threw me. That's why I didn't bet the Jets plus 10, because I'm like, I'm not betting anything early on the week until this stuff shakes down. And then I'll make my adjustments based on the adjustments that the line make. And so I miss out on Dolphins plus 4. Dolphins plus 10. And I might have missed out on a plus 14 that might have been available early on in the week in this game. But that's before we knew about the DeAndre Hopkins injury. Like, I think maybe as high as it goes 13.5, but I think 13 is fine right now to take the Lions.
I got you. Okay. I'm riding with Van Campbell. Let's go. I mentioned that you would have to be talking me out of in a role reversal. Instead of talking me out of taking the points, it's talking me out of taking the favorites. Our next game, you don't have to talk me out of taking the favorite here, as the Niners, 7-6 Niners are at home to the Falcons, and the Niners are 9.5-point favorites. And you know that I have a love-hate relationship with my Niners this season, but under no circumstances am I about to take them as 9.5-point favorites against anybody.
Okay.
Not even Matty Ice.
I thought
that's just where I'm at.
I don't know why I thought you were headed to I'm taking the Niners minus 9.5, and I was going to fall flat off my chair if you were going to.
Have you not been listening to me the whole season? I don't believe in this Niners team.
Maybe it's because I had like 3 hours of sleep last night, tossing and turning after the Chargers game. But I thought
the times that I've bet on the Niners this season, it's because you've talked me into betting on the Niners this season. I've had no faith in them this whole year.
That's why I was like
9.5.
I clearly was not hearing this correctly. It's why I was like, wait, what's happening here? Listen, honestly, I think a lot of people are on the Niners in this game. I am not one of them. This is one where, listen, again, for all of the, we commiserate and we joke or however you want to frame it about the, unfortunate survivor loss on Thanksgiving. The point, the fundamental issue there was like, we got that far. Like we did really well to get that far. And one of the things that we were able to do is we were able to sort of dodge bullets when it came to other big upsets, right? Like that was kind of our main skill in all of that. And this is one that I sort of had circled for a while as, like we plotted out our grid. And so the idea was, quick survivor strategy thing here, right? It's first 5 weeks, play teams that you don't intend on ever using again. And then once you get to week 6, then start planning out where you have a couple of options each week in case something wacky happens, and then have a definitive plan for after Thanksgiving so that your decision-making doesn't get clouded by the fact that you're so close to victory. So again, we have this list of teams, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is to say, San Francisco at home against Atlanta was on the board as one of those options. But for months now, I've looked at that game going, I think the Falcons are going to knock some people out of Survivor that week. And so, yeah, we're not in Survivor anymore. But the logic still remains, or sort of the inkling, if you will, still remains that I would be avoiding this game at all costs with my Survivor entry if I were you out there, people who might still be involved in Survivor. I would be saving San Francisco for, I believe, a road game against Houston later on in the season. So ipso facto, shouts to Houston, who are just getting pummeled here by Survivor options down the stretch. All that is to say, light it up. Light it up, my man. The Atlanta Falcons are the red light special. It has been a while since we really fired up a red light special. That's probably my fault. But maybe just gun shy in the whole upset game. I think the Falcons are live to win this game, couple of different reasons. And it really comes down to the Falcons offense. And so Arthur Smith takes over, and we, obviously talked about Herb just poisoning everything. Arthur Smith, it's not going to turn overnight when you become a head coach of a football team, right? Like you have to have something there. It looked like it turns overnight for the Chargers, but that's really because the talent has always been on that team. And the Anthony Lynn coaching staff just kind of slowly destroyed that by losing close game after close game after close game. Whereas Arthur Smith comes in and there's like just not a ton of talent. And he's the guy, after Cordarrelle Patterson has been in the league for 10 years, he's the guy who found the usage for Cordarrelle Patterson, right? Like that. So at least that's an indicator, like this guy knows what he's doing. Does he know timeouts and challenges and all the other stuff that we kind of make fun of coaches for? Remains to be seen. But at least from an X's and O's standpoint, what he's doing with their offense right now is actually quite impressive. Now watch this. If you watch this, I mean, no, you're going to watch this game because you're 49ers involved. Watch the running plays to the left side of the offensive line for the Falcons. They have figured out in the last month to 2 months that whether it's Patterson, whether it's Davis, that the left side of their offensive line can gash opposing run defenses. They did that against the Bucks, who literally came into that game with Bruce Arians saying, like, we take personal offense if people try to run the football on us. The Falcons were able to do that on them. And so it allows a couple of different things, right? Really basic NFL football stuff, or just football stuff in general. Makes Matt Ryan a lot better. Right? Like that now he has a run game that he can rely on because there's two guys in the backfield, one of which is a great receiver out of the backfield. It allows them to be sort of deceptive, right? And obviously it gives them better down and distance. It gives them play action passing options, all things that Matt Ryan, when he was at his best, had the Devontae Freemans of the world. Remember Tevin Coleman? Like, remember when they had those guys going? I think Michael Turner way back when Matt Ryan first started, right? Like, I think that those two overlapped way back when. Ryan's been around forever. When he has a run game, he's a better quarterback because he is good in the play action pass game. And so that's what's happened with that Falcons offense, where they are at least functional because they are not one-dimensional the way that they have been in the past. And when you have that matchup against the 49ers, which what are the 49ers going to do, right? They're going to try to get Nick Bosa, around the edge, et cetera, et cetera. But if he's worried about getting run at or run away from, that's going to take some of the starch out of Bosa. And as you know, the 49ers secondary kind of sketch at this point, right? Like that's
Not
a
kind
problem. Not just kind of. And so all of this is sort of coming up where the Falcons are actually playing a much better offense because they are multidimensional, and the defense is getting a little bit better too. This isn't the garbage Falcons defense that we have seen in years past, because they hit with Terrell at the cornerback, and a couple of other guys are playing pretty well on the defensive line. So I think the Falcons can hang in this game. Obviously, you never love the Deebo Samuels of the world hitting you in the face. But the 49ers came off a pretty emotional overtime win last week where the Falcons were able to do nicely to just take care of business against the Panthers. That was impressive to me. And even though, right, they didn't end up covering against the Bucs, they probably deserved to. And you have this sort of like list of teams where on one end, it's good teams that the Falcons have played and have gotten blown out by those teams. And then bad teams the Falcons have played and they have beaten those teams. So it's very easy to say like the step up in weight class could be problematic for the Falcons. This is really more just about the development of the team within the structure of Arthur Smith and the stuff that he's finding that he didn't necessarily know existed in say week 1 or week 4, right? But once we roll around to week 15, now he's got an idea of what he's got in front of him, and he's using it pretty well here. I think the Falcons are live to win this game outright.
I like it, and it's taken a while, but I finally get to just say take the points on this podcast.
There's been some take the points. We just did some take the points.
No. But I'm saying like my analysis, my particular analysis of just looking at the point spread and being like, whoa, what are we doing here? Gotcha. Take the points. That's what I'm saying. But as we move ahead here, before we get to the Sunday Nighter, I just want to give a little reminder that the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter, if you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. So make sure you sign up for free for the Sunday Scoop e-newsletter and check out Scott Gramling's weekly 6-pack in both the NFL and NCAA. And we know our guy Scott's also got his in-depth in-game previews. drf.com/sports. We've got you covered in any way that you need your betting angles. On to the Sunday Nighter. 6-7 Saints at the 10-3 Bucks. Bucks at home favored by 11 points. That's a lot of points. The Bucks and Saints normally play tight games, but can the Saints put up enough points? I don't know. That's kind of my question here. Can the Saints put up enough points? And as I look at the 11-point spread, that's where I'm kind of like, it's tough. My lean is to take the Bucks. My lean is to take the Bucks and lay all those points, but I don't like it.
Honestly, I just have to rely on the handicap from the last time these two teams played, right? And that's that this defense does well against Tom Brady, right? And when I'm not saying that they're going to win, this isn't a red light special. I'm not saying the Saints are going to win this game, and you're 100% right being worried about the Saints offense here. The good news is Alvin Kamara is back and does look to be more healthy than he has been all season long. We talked last week, and listen, the premise was Kamara comes back, the line moves up, and we take the Jets +6, +6.5. And the wild thing come Sunday was that that Kamara was announced back in, as was, I believe, Teron Armstead. And the line went down, down to 4, And so you're just sort of sitting there like, oh, okay, well, enough of that, I guess. Like if it was available at 6.5, like, yeah, I would. Yeah. And it sort of saves you some money in that case because the Saints end up winning that game because Kamara comes back and he looks a little bit like the old Kamara, right? Like the guy who was capable of 100 yards rushing and catching the ball out of the backfield and all of that sort of thing. On the surface, right, we look at the Bucs and we go, this team like stuff in the run defense. And, I just referenced it, like the idea that they gave up a bunch of rush yards to the Falcons. Well, the Bills didn't necessarily even try to run the football last week. When they did, it was very much in pass type situations. And that's not what the Saints do. So I certainly understand that. But I think the Saints can run the football here a little bit against the Bucs. And Throwing the football with Taysom Hill, maybe not something you necessarily want to rely on here. But again, the bar being as high as it is here with like 11-point spread, that might go to 11.5. It has actually, shown up a little bit 11.5s out there. And that makes a difference if we're talking about a 31-20 type of a game or something along those lines, right? But I don't think the Bucs are going to score 31 points because they just kind of don't against this Saints defense that by and large is pretty healthy right now. And so it's the same handicap as it was when we called the Saints to win outright back in New Orleans. Now, again, that was with Jameis Winston, even though he went out and we saw Trevor Siemian come in. I think he made like 2 throws of quality the entire game. And maybe we do see some Trevor Siemian in this game, right? Maybe we run that similar game plan back out there. Who knows? But I just think at this point, nice win for the Saints last week to at least take care of that. And as much as we look back and go, oh, they just beat the Jets, like they were still only 4-point favorites on the closing number. Like that still means something that they won that game. And it didn't count as like a, big favorite just taking care of business, right? Like it was a legitimate victory from a market standpoint. So I'm on the Saints here. I submitted this as well as a contest play. Again, it is just a fundamental, it's just dusted off from 5 weeks ago or whenever that was. The same handicap here that this game ends up being at least relatively close here. I mean, maybe that means a 10-point win for the Bucs, but I'm fine with that.
As mentioned, it's a role reversal of this edition of the pod. And I know that if you're new to this, you're kind of like, wait, what are you talking about? Well, normally it's double-digit spreads, big-time spreads. I say to Matt, hey, talk me out of taking the points. And after last week's beating, I'm sitting here on the flip side saying, talk me out of laying the points. And you've been doing that here and there with me with the Saints. And listen, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, so just a couple of notes on that. And part of the reason you're doing that is because I literally told you to on Tuesday. Not you sort of specifically, but I mean, you're sitting across from me here. But I said, like, this is maybe take the favorite a little bit more often season, right? But again, you look at a card and a couple of things happen. Well, one, Houston and Jacksonville play each other. Right. Like there's a lot of different ways in which this is bet against Houston by giving 10.5 points with some random team, or bet against Jacksonville, giving, 10.5 points by some random team. Or maybe this is Arizona a little bit healthier against Detroit. And by the way, because a lot of these, and this is sort of off the board here a little bit, but like, maybe there's an extra point on some of these lines because of last week as well, especially these bigger point spreads, right? Where it's like, a lot of people flush with cash, especially the Stooges who lined up to bet the Chiefs, even though half of their defense was gone, and somehow managed to win that game last night against the spread. So a lot of people with cash, a lot of people willing to take the favorite after last week. And by the way, 16 games this week. So we haven't talked about, say, Washington, Philadelphia, speaking of like COVID ravaged games. And if speaking of guys off the street, right? Like between COVID and just injury stuff, you could talk me into Philadelphia -9. Like I'm certainly not dying to grab Washington, even though at one point, because of the idea that a bunch of guys might be back and maybe that line is an overreaction, like you could talk me into that too, but there's a reason it's not a best bet. But point is, if you were looking for some big favorite to lay it with, Philadelphia, certainly an option. Buffalo, certainly an option if you were willing to just hand out some points, because how many points is Carolina going to score and how many points is Buffalo going to score in that game? The answer might be not very many to quite a lot in that game, right? So like that might be one if you're dying to just hand some points out. As far as the other
Cam's
games are
not back, no.
He is not. In fact, he might be back on the bench, in which case PJ Walker is involved. And PJ Walker, I'm just going to say it, sucks. We didn't talk about Green Bay, Baltimore, because we don't know what to say about that game right now, right? Like if Lamar Jackson's out, this is a very in-between line. If Lamar Jackson gets announced out, doesn't this go to 7.5? So you're doing two things. You're betting on the game, but you're also adding a parlay leg in a lot of ways. You're adding the will he or won't he leg to a parlay, right? So if you're betting the Packers, you're taking the he won't play and the Packers -5.5. And if you're betting on the Ravens, you're betting on him that he will play, and you're betting on the Ravens. So like, what are we going to say necessarily about that? Right. So you just wait and see how much a line gets adjusted. And maybe that means you end up given some points there with Green Bay. Seattle and the Rams. I loved Seattle right up until the point Tyler Lockett was ruled out with COVID. They were my upset of the week. They would have been the red light special, all of the above, because Russell Wilson may be back, right? 8 weeks from his injury that was supposed to take 8 weeks for recovery. Guess what? It took 8 weeks. He just happened to play for the last couple of weeks, which didn't seem too smart of a move on his part, right? So there's a bunch of different games. I mean, Dallas and New York, like, I don't know how you can lay 10.5, 11 points on the road with Dallas when Dak is clearly not correct at this point. But again, these aren't making the best bet list. So when we're talking 16 games and it looks like, oh man, he's got 4 or 5 big underdogs, what happened to taking the favorite? It's probably some pretty decent favorites out there against some pretty decent Cancun candidates, if you will. Unfortunately, some of these Cancun candidates are just playing each other. So that kind of jams up the whole concept as well.
Just jamming everything up. Go G-Men. Go G-Men. I was sitting there on the G-Men. I can't lie to you.
Don't hate it.
We got one more though. We got the Monday Night Football game here, and the 5-7 Vikings are 5.5 point favorites at the Bears. Vikings laying over a field goal on the road is a no-go for me. I feel like it's tough. It's tough, right? Because the Vikings, I know, especially early on in the season, they were a team that we relied on a lot, and they covered for us a lot in a lot of different spots. There was a middle ground, and then now they're kind of, maybe I'm just hurt from last week's performance. Maybe that's what's bothering me. Last week's performance hurt my feelings. Maybe that could be it, in terms of they came through for us, right? Mm-hmm. They came through.
Yeah.
But it wasn't pretty.
No, it wasn't pretty.
Not. And I'm maybe a little scarred by that. Is that what's happening to me right now?
Yeah, but like, that's fine. Like, scar tissue is scar tissue, right? Like, it exists in this case. And like, the Vikings are renowned for like going to Chicago and like just kind of laying one, right? And Kirk Cousins is renowned for playing on Monday Night Football or whatever night football and just kind of laying one. Like, this is a team that almost allowed, and let's be honest, right? Harrison Smith doesn't get his hand in there, and Freiermuth gets the touchdown, and we're talking about the Vikings with an all-time choke, right? Yeah. So like, one guy making a play prevented the Vikings from being all-time choker levels. Just think about that for a second, right? And now they go on the road and this line opens 3.5. And then again, you think to yourself, oh, should I grab that 3.5? We're getting the hook here with the Bears. But you can't do it, can you? Because the bid is around the corner. And guess what happens, right? It hits the Bears. Now, it's not as drastic yet as the Browns or the Washington football team, which is why we get to wait and see what happens come Monday. But my plan right now is wait. Mm-hmm. Come Monday, try to get some 6, maybe a +6.5. We'll see. If something crazy happens and all of a sudden Fields is out and the O-line is out, then obviously we're not committing to anything necessarily. Yeah. But the Bears are the only side I'm willing to take in this game. And, Allen Robinson, it was nice that he was back against the Packers, but there was enough offensive chemistry and offensive creativity last week against the Packers that it was sort of heartening to watch Justin Fields. Now, there's a fumble in there at one point and these sort of things that are going to happen along the way, but it was also Aaron freaking Rodgers was in there as well. And so it's easy to look at that game and be like, that might be their Super Bowl, the Bears like chance to get revenge on Aaron Rodgers. And they came up short, even though they were very much in that game. And that's fine. I think a Monday Night Football game at home is kind of a big deal for a Bears team that, again, I can't say that they've quit on Matt Nagy. I would have, right? I am right there. I hope he's not coaching in this game so that maybe somebody goes for it on 4th down. Maybe by Monday, he'll realize that he needs to go for it on 4th down. Maybe, that night's sleep that he got from Sunday to Monday, right? It really change his attitude. Maybe this Monday night, he's really ready to fire away here. So yeah, I like the Bears here. Obviously you have to wait because of the issues. And again, once one guy or 2 guys or 6 guys have it, you obviously think maybe more do. And hopefully things are contained over there and it's only Allen Robinson. And by the way, Monday night also means that if some of these guys are vaccinated, they could be back by then, right? So there's a bunch of different ways that this goes. I just think there's either you get them at 6, the Bears +6, with a couple of COVID outages, if you will, or you get them back where they were at +3.5 if everybody's back and okay, good to go. Either one of those plays I think is probably good enough for me, but we can wait till Monday to sort of see how everything shakes down.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. The Bears, I'm riding with the Bears. As I said, I can't, there's just not a world where I feel comfortable in taking Kirk Cousins on the road like that.
Nor should you.
In prime time on a Monday night. But here we are. Let's keep it moving though here, because we'll get to college football. Bowl season is here. Bowl season, we're fired up. I'm going to put you on the spot here though, because we've been going for a while here, and I'm going to put you on the spot to try to speed things up here. You hear the music going, the music is running, the music is playing.
Yeah.
I want to put you on the spot and get you to break down the Saturday bowl games, what you're thinking, where you're leaning, where the money's sitting, and you hear the music. That means a hurry up offense for our fans who are familiar with this pod. I'm just going to step aside, hand the ball off, and let you cook, my dude. Let's go.
Yeah, get out of the way, just like any running backs need to for Western Kentucky when Bailey Zappi is cooking. We're getting 3 points with Bailey Zappi in Western Kentucky. You know we've been against App State this whole season, and why would we stop now, right? Like, this is sort of the final chance to believe in what we believe, and we've been back in Western Kentucky, and we've been fading App State. By the way, full previews on each one of these games over at The Score. I'll tweet that out. I think I've already done so actually on Friday. So go into the page and check that out. UTEP +11.5, right? Anything double digits here is okay. Thought we might have something here with Jake Haener opting out, or I should say getting into the transfer portal. He's like the only guy to get in the portal and then somehow get out of the portal alive, not on the other side. Like within the same week, he like apologized to people for going into the portal. Like, I don't know what's going on there. What I do know is Fresno State is without their head coach, Caleb DeBoer, who went to Washington to take over the Huskies. He's gone. They're back to Jeff Tedford, their old Fresno State guy. He's back after leaving the team a couple of years back due to health issues. Now, that's great because Haener's going to come back next season before he sort of tries for the NFL and all of that sort of thing. But I don't know if that's necessarily a great fit for like, hey, new coach, let's prepare for this game right now. And I'm sure Tedford has some ideas of how things are going to be run, et cetera, et cetera. So I think 11.5 points for UTEP is a pretty decent idea in that game. I absolutely love the UAB Blazers. They are as good, if not better, of a football team as BYU. And we're getting 6.5 right now, which is obviously a little bit dicey. We'd rather the 7. It was 8. So if it'll grab +8, we've moved this thing through 7. I think that's an indicator that UAB is live to win this game. So very interested in them, obviously at +6.5. If there's 7 out there, absolutely take the 7. And +220 on the money line isn't the craziest thing I've ever heard in the world. Eastern Michigan and Liberty, not going to say too much about this game. Don't really have a heavy take on this game. If it got to 10, I'd back Eastern Michigan, but Eastern Michigan is one of those teams that metrically looks bad. Liberty is one of those teams that off the bus looks really good. And then Liberty takes a bunch of penalties, turns the ball over. Eastern Michigan doesn't take any penalties and takes advantage of those turnovers. And all of a sudden, like the scrappy team from the MAC takes advantage of all of these sort of dark area edge type things and ends up either staying in this game or maybe winning it outright. That being said, the talent discrepancy and metrics are pretty obvious here in favor of Liberty, but that's what the 9.5 points is for. Game that I love, Oregon State. Get the -7. It's teetering depending on where you look. -7.5, +100, or -7, -115 out there. Oregon State is a goal-oriented team. I like this team because they have a veteran offensive line that will push you around. They care about certain goals that maybe a lot of teams, other than them, wouldn't care about. They cared about going undefeated at home in the regular season. That was important to them. They succeeded. It was important to them to qualify for a bowl game. They succeeded in doing that. Meanwhile, Utah State We talked about them going in the Mountain West Conference, not playing anybody in that league and getting a good enough record that they were able to be in that championship game. And then they beat San Diego State. But that's because San Diego, I shouldn't say it's because, but it helped that San Diego State was ravaged by various illnesses in that game. And so that made it a lot easier for Utah State. They win the Mountain West. That's great. And now they go to a bowl game. But like, feels like that game was kind of it for them, right? Like what's their motivation now when you're going up against a veteran type Oregon State team here who can score on you? So I like Oregon State to win that game comfortably. -7's the number you want there. And then to finish off the night, Marshall and Lafayette. And this is going to be a shameless plug. Marshall's +5 here. I'm on Marshall. Lafayette.
Okay.
Congrats again. Similar story to Utah State. Won the conference championship. The coach heads off to Florida. So they are, sort of quasi head coachless here after beating their arch rival, App State. Little bit of a letdown type situation. Marshall's season didn't go as they had hoped, but this is still a really good team that went to App State earlier this season, and they lost by 1 point. You'll remember we were on Marshall as an underdog. They had a 9-point lead in the fourth quarter of that game as a midweek Sun Belt game. And so they can if they could hang with App State, they can hang with Lafayette. They will hang here. I think they win this game outright. And again, shameless plug. I will, again, tweet it out at MRussAuthentic, but my article over at The Score about Saturday's game has a round-robin money line parlay for the entirety of bowl season, a 5-gamer that starts on Saturday with this Marshall team and ends like New Year's Day with a certain school that Colin Wilson is an alum of, your guest from the last podcast. That's where it ends, and there's 3 games in between, so you have to go check that out in order to find out what those 3 games in between the 5-game round-robin moneyline parlay.
That, my friend, is what we in the biz call a tease, and I like it. Because you know what? Just continuing to give out the whole grain goodness that the people crave and we need, especially as the NFL season continues. We're into week 15. We're nearing around Christmas. Plus, it's bowl season. So much going on. So, of course, any type of picks we can get, we'll take it. I'm going to ask you again to remind the people where they can find you, though, online, on social media, to get more of your information and education, as I like to call it.
Yeah, man, celebrating and commiserating. A little too much commiserating for my liking in the last couple of weeks with some of these bad beats, but that's happening over at MRussAuthentic over on Twitter. So yeah, everything that I do over at The Score gets retweeted through there. And of course, we get these primetime games where we get to, I was going to say the B word, we get to commiserate all over again. Hopefully not too much more this season, but it is what it is.
It happens, my dude. And no matter what the outcome is, I'll be back begging you to come back on again to, help me through the weekend that was. So thanks again for stopping by, my dude.
Thanks, brother. Can't wait for the next one.
And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And for more from this brand new project from DRF Sports, we just got to make sure, if you're not familiar with the letters DRF, Daily Racing Form has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we're taking over the entire sports world. So if you want all the coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, go to drf.com/sports. That's where you get the usual game previews. And of course, we go in depth on this podcast. Basically, however you want your betting information, we've got you covered. That's all I got for now. But remember to tune into this DRF Sports Podcast every Tuesday and Friday. And hey, sometimes if you're lucky, we sprinkle in a little extra episode here and there. But until next time, that's all I got for now. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at @drf_sports.